It was an ordinary night at the lunar relay station, the kind of silent, endless night that surrounded the moon every cycle. The sky above the dome was full of cold stars twinkling far beyond human reach. Inside the command room, a handful of tired engineers worked quietly, sipping lukewarm coffee, waiting for their shift to end. For years, nothing unusual had happened there. Most of the signals they received were just echoes, data fragments, or static waves bouncing between forgotten satellites. But at exactly 0317 UTC, everything changed. A strange pulse appeared on their main screen. A repeating signal, faint and broken, like a heartbeat buried in noise. At first, the operators thought it was interference, maybe from a mining beacon or a lost probe drifting through space. But the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. One of the technicians, a young woman named Kaya Lin, noticed a pattern in the distortion. She ran a decoding sequence out of curiosity. Within minutes, the sound began to form words, not in any Earth language, but clearly structured. Someone, somewhere, was trying to speak. Kaya called her supervisor, and soon the small station was fully awake. The message grew stronger as they adjusted the frequency. It wasn't human, that much was certain. The waveform carried harmonics far beyond any Terran design. When they finally filtered the static, a trembling voice emerged. It was high-pitched and quivering, like someone speaking through tears. The translation system struggled at first, but a few phrases became clear. Help us. Attack. Cities burning. Please. Anyone. For a long moment, no one spoke. The words hung in the air like a ghost. They had received thousands of transmissions over the years. Old automated signals, abandoned probes, even echoes from dead colonies. But never something like this. It was a real distress call. Someone out there was begging for help. The recording included faint visuals, broken and blurred but unmistakable. A city under fire, tall crystalline towers shattering under orbital bombardment, and strange luminous beings running for cover. They looked terrified, fragile, their skin glowing faintly as explosions lit the sky behind them. The message repeated again, the same voice crying for help. Then the screen went black. The lunar team immediately sent the data to Earth. Within hours, it reached the United Earth Council's secure network. Scientists, linguists, and defense officials crowded around as the footage was replayed in full resolution. Some were fascinated, others disturbed. The alien species was soon identified through ancient galactic records. The Valari Dominion, a civilization thought to have vanished centuries ago after the fall of the old Galactic Alliance. Their technology was graceful, energy-based, and peaceful. They were artists, not soldiers. No one knew who had attacked them or why. But one thing was clear, the Valari were desperate. They had sent that message into the dark, hoping someone would hear it. And somehow, by chance or fate, it had reached humanity. The council meeting that followed lasted for hours. In the great chamber orbiting Earth, leaders from dozens of nations and colonies argued endlessly. Some said humanity must stay out of it. They had signed the Treaty of Sol generations ago, swearing to never again interfere in interstellar wars. The last one had nearly wiped them out. Billions lost, planets scorched, entire fleets gone. They had survived, but only by withdrawing completely. For a century, Earth had stayed silent, rebuilding in the shadows, avoiding contact with any alien powers. Others disagreed. They said the universe had changed and silence was no longer safety. Humanity was no longer weak. They had rebuilt their fleets, improved their technology, and learned from past mistakes. The Valari had not called for war. They had called for mercy. And humans, for all their flaws, still understood mercy. Among the council members sat Admiral Mara Vance, an old war veteran who had seen humanity's darkest days. Her face was calm, her voice low. She listened quietly to the shouting, the fear, the politics. When the room finally fell silent, she stood and looked at the holographic image frozen above the table, the image of a burning Valari city. Then she spoke just one sentence. If they called us, they already know who we are. Her words hit the room like a thunderclap. Everyone understood what she meant. Humanity's history was known throughout the stars. They were the Deathworlders, the species that had survived on a planet that killed everything unprepared. The species that had fought impossible wars and still stood tall. The Valari hadn't sent their SOS randomly. They had sent it because they remembered what humans were capable of. They believed humans would come. That night, while the politicians continued to argue, messages began to move through unofficial channels. Military commanders contacted old friends. Engineers opened sealed shipyards. Scientists reactivated dormant AI networks designed for deep space logistics. Something ancient and unstoppable had started moving within humanity's core, a quiet awakening that no treaty could silence. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, ordinary people began to hear rumors. News leaks mentioned an alien distress call. Social networks buzzed with speculation. Was it real or another hoax? When the government finally confirmed that an off-world SOS had been detected, public opinion exploded. Millions demanded that humanity respond. The memory of past wars was still painful, but the sight of the Volari suffering touched something deep inside. People remembered what it meant to help, to protect, to stand against cruelty. Across the colonies, volunteers began enlisting in droves. Old pilots returned to training programs. Retired engineers offered to help rebuild the fleet. The words, "We can't ignore this," spread faster than any official statement. Humanity, once quiet and hidden, was beginning to stir like a sleeping giant. On Mars, in the massive shipyard beneath the red dust, the skeleton of an old battleship stood half-buried and forgotten. Its nameplate still read Ewan's Resolute, a warship from the last great conflict. Now, under the dim light of reconstruction drones, the ship came alive again. Engines roared, systems blinked awake, and new armor plates were welded onto its hull. The workers there didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Every spark that flew from their torches was a promise. Humanity was preparing to move. Out near Saturn's rings, cargo freighters were converted into mobile medical stations. On Titan, drone factories shifted production from civilian tools to combat frames. The change was happening everywhere, silently but swiftly. The galaxy had long believed that Earth was quiet, broken, and content to remain in isolation. But now, the message from the Volari had cracked that illusion wide open. In the following weeks, the SOS continued to echo across human channels. Analysts discovered that the Volari had sent the same message to dozens of systems, but none had responded. Humanity was the only one that heard it, or perhaps the only one that cared to answer. The final decision came after endless debate. The United Earth Council officially announced a humanitarian response mission, but everyone knew it would be more than that. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a declaration. Humanity was stepping back into the galaxy not as conquerors, but as defenders of those who had no one else. As the first fleet prepared for launch, Admiral Vance stood on the bridge of the UNS Resolute, watching the stars beyond the viewport. Her officers moved efficiently around her, checking systems, loading supplies, synchronizing FTL drives. In her hand, she held a small data crystal, the original recording of the Volari distress call. She listened one last time to the trembling alien voice pleading for help. Then she placed it gently on the console and whispered, "We heard you." Moments later, the engines came alive, shaking the hull with deep thunder. The launch countdown echoed across all communication channels. As the massive ship began to rise from Mars's surface, the world watched through live feeds. Children cheered, veterans saluted, and billions of eyes looked up at the night sky. The last words before the jump were simple, spoken by Vance herself. "Set course for the Volari system. Let's remind the galaxy who we are." And then, with a flash brighter than dawn, the fleet vanished into the dark. Far away, in that burning corner of the galaxy, the Volari still prayed for help. They didn't know yet that humanity had heard their call. They didn't know that from the blue planet across the stars, an ancient power was already on its way, a power born from fire, pain, and unbreakable will. Humanity, the Deathworlders, had awoken once more. The order to prepare for deployment spread across the solar system like a silent storm. The message was short, direct, and classified. Operation Dawnfire, status active. Few people understood what it truly meant, but for those who did, their hearts began to pound. Humanity was going to war again. After more than 100 years of peace and isolation, the Deathworlders were waking up. In the hidden shipyards above Mars, huge construction lights lit up the darkness. Machines that had been silent for decades began to move. The air filled with the metallic hum of welders, the roar of engines being tested, and the steady rhythm of drills working deep into steel. Ships that had once been museum relics were being rebuilt piece by piece. The UNS Resolute, the Vanguard, and the Erebus, names that had once belonged to legends, were being restored for battle. Thousands of engineers worked non-stop, eating and sleeping in their suits. The walls of the shipyards trembled with life again. No one complained about the long hours or the cold. They all understood why they were there. Somewhere out in the galaxy, an innocent world was burning and humanity had promised to answer. Meanwhile, the command centers on Earth and Luna were in constant motion. Tactical officers created new battle simulations, while intelligence teams tried to learn everything about the enemy who had attacked the Volari. But data was limited. The only thing they knew for sure was the name, Crexian Ascendancy, a powerful, arrogant empire that ruled by fear. Their fleets had crushed smaller races with ease, enslaving survivors and stripping their planets bare. The Crexians believed humanity was gone, too broken and quiet to matter anymore. That was their first mistake. The preparations continued in secret, but word still began to spread. On every colony and station, people whispered about what was coming. They remembered stories told by their grandparents, the stories of the last great war when humanity fought against impossible odds and survived. Some were afraid, others excited, but one thing united them all. They knew that once the first human fleet left Sol, nothing would ever be the same again. On Titan, the cold moon of Saturn, the Nova foundries worked day and night to produce new weapons. Factories once used for mining tools now built plasma cannons and railgun cores. Old defense platforms were reactivated, their ancient systems humming with energy. The workers there carved a message into the steel of every weapon. For the Volari, for humanity. It became their quiet battle cry. In the academies, soldiers were being trained faster than ever before. New recruits stood in long lines under the artificial sunlight of orbital training stations. They learned the history of the Deathworlders, what it meant to be born on a planet that fought you every day. The instructors told them stories of Earth's jungles that could swallow a man whole, of oceans that raged with storms, and of volcanoes that reshaped the land. If you can survive the world that made you, they said, you can survive anything. Some soldiers laughed nervously, others listened in silence. Many were too young to remember the last war, but all of them understood one truth: humans were different. They didn't fight because they loved war. They fought because when someone cried for help, they couldn't ignore it. That was the difference between Deathworlders and the rest of the galaxy. Admiral Mara Vance moved among her fleet like a shadow of calm. She watched every ship report, every readiness log, and every personnel transfer. Her presence alone was enough to keep morale strong. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it meant something had gone right. To her officers, she was a legend. To her enemies, if they ever met her, she would be a nightmare. One evening, as she stood on the observation deck of the Resolute, she looked down at Mars's red surface below. The shipyard lights flickered like fireflies. Beside her, Captain Ren Ortega spoke quietly. "It's strange, isn't it? We swore never to fight again, and yet here we are." Vance didn't turn her eyes from the stars. "We didn't break our promise," she said softly. "We're not fighting for conquest. We're fighting because someone out there still believes in us. That's reason enough." Her words spread among the crew. In the mess halls and corridors, they repeated them like a vow. Someone out there still believes in us. As days passed, the solar system itself began to change. Civilian ships were redirected to carry supplies. Mining colonies on the asteroid belt were converted into fuel depots. Massive freighters carried millions of tons of armor plating, ammunition, and food toward the staging areas near Jupiter. The skies were filled with movement: freighters, shuttles, repair drones, all part of the Great Awakening. The people of Earth watched from their cities, seeing bright lights move across the night sky like falling stars. Every launch was broadcast live, and even though the government avoided calling it war, everyone knew the truth. This was not just a rescue mission. This was humanity's return. In the classrooms, children drew pictures of spaceships and heroes. On social media, the phrase "for the Volari" became the most repeated message in history. Old soldiers came out of retirement, volunteering to train the young. On Luna, a group of pilots painted ancient human symbols on their ships: wolves, eagles, and dragons, reminders of where they came from. In secret, military strategists studied the old battle records. They remembered how humans had once fought alien empires and won through sheer determination, and unpredictable tactics. The galaxy had learned to fear human adaptability. They could lose 10 battles and still find a way to win the 11th. At the same time, the politicians continued to argue in private. Some feared this mission would destroy the fragile peace humanity had built. Others believed that ignoring the Valari's cry would destroy something even greater, the soul of humankind. Finally, the decision came down to one vote. And when the last representative said, "Aye," a quiet cheer erupted across the control decks. The resolution of aid and response was passed. Humanity would officially enter the Valari system. It wasn't just the military that prepared. Scientists began designing medical drones, translators, and atmospheric shelters for alien survivors. Artists painted banners showing human and Valari hands reaching toward each other. Poets wrote lines that made people cry. Humanity was preparing not just to fight, but to protect, to heal, and to show that compassion could be stronger than fear. As the fleets neared readiness, Admiral Vance called for a final inspection. On the day of departure, she stood before thousands of soldiers lined up on the deck of the Resolute. The atmosphere was heavy, but the silence was powerful. She didn't give a long speech. She simply said, "You all know why we're here. We don't fight for revenge. We fight so that no one else will ever have to send a call like that again. The galaxy has forgotten what humanity stands for. Let's remind them." Her voice carried through every ship, every channel. The soldiers responded with one united phrase, "We are the Deathworlders." When the fleet began to move, the sight was breathtaking. Dozens of warships, carriers, and support vessels aligned in orbit. Their engines glowed blue and gold, lighting up the darkness like a new sunrise. From Earth, they looked like streaks of light cutting across the sky. Families watched from rooftops, waving at the heavens. Some cried, some prayed, but all felt the same pride in their hearts. As the Resolute took position at the head of the fleet, Admiral Vance stood at the command bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. The officers counted down the minutes to FTL activation. Reports came in from all corners. Fuel levels stable, weapons charged, navigation aligned. Everything was ready. Before giving the jump order, she glanced at the message Crystal still kept near her console. It contained the original Valari distress call. The voice was faint now, but still clear enough to hear the fear and pain in it. Vance closed her eyes for a brief moment, then whispered to herself, "Hold on. We're coming." The stars outside stretched and blurred as the fleet entered hyperspace. The sound was like thunder echoing through eternity. Humanity, once asleep, was now wide awake. Back on Earth, as the sky returned to quiet, people knew that something vast had changed. They didn't know what would happen next or if their fleets would ever return. But deep inside, they felt something powerful. Hope. For the first time in a century, the universe would remember what kind of beings came from the death world called Earth. They were not monsters. They were not savages. They were protectors, and their silence had ended. Humanity had risen again, not out of pride or anger, but because someone cried out for help. And humans could never ignore a cry for help. When the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, the stars around them seemed to shiver. For a moment, everything was calm and quiet, an endless black sea dotted with distant light. But as the sensors cleared, that silence turned into horror. The Valari system was burning. From orbit, entire continents glowed red. Cities that had once sparkled like jewels were now covered in smoke and ash. The fleet that attacked them, the Crexian Ascendancy, was still there, their warships circling the dying world like vultures over a corpse. On the bridge of the UNS Resolute, Admiral Mara Vance stood still, watching the live feed projected above the command table. Her jaw tightened. No one spoke. Around her, officers moved quickly, scanning for survivors, reading energy signatures, and mapping the enemy formation. There were at least 30 Crexian vessels, including heavy dreadnoughts and orbital bombers. The humans were outnumbered nearly 3-1, but that didn't matter to her. "Are there Valari life signs on the surface?" she asked quietly. "Yes, Admiral," replied Lieutenant Cruz. "Multiple signatures, weak but still there. They're hiding underground. It looks like they've been trying to signal again, but the enemy is jamming their channels." Vance nodded once. "Then we'll clear the sky for them." The officers looked at her. They all knew what that meant. There would be no negotiation, no warning, and no retreat. Humanity had come too far to turn back now. The Crexians noticed them soon after. The alien fleet shifted position, locking weapons on the human ships. The communication channel crackled to life and a deep, harsh voice filled the bridge. Unidentified fleet. You are trespassing in Crexian-controlled space. Identify yourself or be destroyed. Admiral Vance didn't answer immediately. Her crew watched her, waiting. The alien continued, laughing in its guttural tone. Ah, humans. We thought your kind extinct. You come to die in someone else's war. Foolish creatures from your cursed death world. Leave now or we will burn your ships as we burn theirs. Vance's expression never changed. She turned to her communication officer and said calmly, "Cut the channel." The officer obeyed. Then she gave a single order. Weapons free. The space around the Resolute exploded into motion. Railguns fired massive slugs at hypersonic speed. Glowing plasma rounds streaked across the void, and the ship's engines roared as it surged forward. The first Crexian cruiser never saw the attack coming. The human projectile punched through its shields and tore the ship in half, scattering debris and fire into the blackness. The Crexian fleet responded instantly, unleashing waves of energy fire. Blue plasma bolts lit up the darkness, hitting the human formation like a storm. But the Deathworlders didn't flinch. Their ships moved with cold precision, weaving through the barrage like predators. Every shot they took was deliberate, deadly. Within minutes, the battle became chaos. The UNS Vanguard rammed straight through an enemy frigate, splitting it apart. Swarms of human drones darted between larger ships, planting magnetic charges and detonating reactors. Crexian ships began to break formation, their commanders shouting over open channels in panic. Down on the Valari homeworld, survivors hiding underground saw the sky light up. The explosions looked like 1,000 new suns being born at once. For days they had believed no one would come. Now, as they watched alien warships burning in orbit, they began to weep. One Valari mother held her child close and whispered, "They came. Someone answered us." In orbit, the Crexians tried to reorganize. Their flagship, a massive vessel called the Blood Serpent, turned its guns toward the Resolute. The alien commander roared over the comms again. "You cannot save them, humans. You are outnumbered." Vance leaned forward. "Then it's a fair fight," the Resolute charged. Its forward cannons fired continuously, heating up until the metal glowed orange. The ship cut straight through the enemy line, shattering their coordination. The Blood Serpent fired a plasma beam that nearly tore the Resolute's left wing apart. But the humans refused to fall back. Vance gave one final command: all power to rail batteries. Target their core. The shot that followed split space itself. The Resolute's main railgun fired a tungsten slug the size of a small shuttle at near light speed. It pierced the Blood Serpent's shield, hull, and reactor in one unstoppable strike. The Crexian flagship exploded into a white ball of fire, vaporizing half its escort ships instantly. The remaining Crexians began to scatter. Some tried to flee into hyperspace. Others fired blindly in panic. Human ships pursued them relentlessly, cutting them down one by one. There was no mercy in this battle. Humanity was not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for those who could not fight back. When the last enemy ship exploded, silence fell again. Smoke and wreckage drifted across the Valari skies like ghosts. On the surface, the surviving Valari dared to come out from their shelters for the first time in weeks. They looked up and saw something they had never seen before. Human ships descending through the clouds, their hulls scorched but unbroken, engines glowing softly as they entered the atmosphere. The Valari were cautious at first. They had heard stories of Deathworlders, creatures from a savage planet who could survive anything. But when the human soldiers stepped out of their transports, they came not with weapons raised but with open hands. Their armor was black and heavy, their visors glowing faint blue, but their movements were calm. A group of Valari elders approached, trembling. One of them, her voice weak, asked in broken English, "You came to fight?" A human marine removed his helmet, revealing a young face, tired and covered in ash. "No," he said softly. "We came to help." Those words spread like fire through the survivors. The humans began distributing food, water, and medical aid. Their medics worked tirelessly, using both human and alien tech to treat the wounded. Engineers set up energy shields around the surviving cities. Everywhere the Deathworlders went, the Valari watched them in awe. These beings, so feared across the galaxy, were gentle in victory. They were fierce only to protect, but there were moments that reminded everyone of what humans truly were. When one of the Crexian escape ships tried to return and attack the evacuation zone, The humans responded instantly. A single missile from the Vanguard struck the ship before it could even fire. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space, but it reminded everyone watching that the wrath of the Deathworlders was never far away. Later that night, in the burned ruins of the Valari capital, Admiral Vance walked through the shattered streets. She saw alien children sleeping under makeshift shelters, guarded by human soldiers who stood silent in the cold air. The Admiral stopped and looked up at the stars, those same stars where just hours ago a battle had raged. Her second-in-command joined her, quietly asking, "Was it worth it?" Vance nodded. "Every life we saved tonight says it was." At that moment, a small group of Valari approached her. They bowed deeply and spoke words that their translator barely managed to render. "You came from the death world, yet you brought mercy on wings of fire." The Admiral didn't reply. She didn't need to. Those words would travel far beyond that world, carried by traders, travelers, and refugees until they reached every corner of the galaxy. The legend of the Deathworlders, the humans who answered the cry of another race, was born that day. In the days that followed, humanity helped rebuild what they could. They buried the dead with honor, both Valari and Crexian, because war was never something they celebrated. But they left one message behind, carved into a memorial stone in the Valari capital. "We heard your call. We came not as conquerors, but as protectors. May no world ever cry alone again." When the human fleet finally departed, the Valari stood together, watching their saviors vanish into the stars. The sky above their world was peaceful once more. But in that peace lay a new kind of fear. Fear among the galaxy's empires that the Deathworlders were back, and that their silence had ended. From that day forward, no one dared to ignore a human transmission. Because every civilization now knew the truth. If you called for help and humanity heard you, the Deathworlders would come. And when they did, the stars themselves would burn. News of what humanity had done in the Valari system spread across the galaxy, faster than light. Every world, every station, every empire heard the same story. The Deathworlders had returned. In the beginning, some didn't believe it. They said no species could destroy an entire Crexian fleet in a single day. Others claimed it was a trick, a false rumor meant to frighten rival empires. But when Crexian survivors broadcasted their surrender in terror, the truth could no longer be denied. Humanity, long silent and hidden, had risen again, and this time they were fighting not for power, but for justice. For the Valari, it was a miracle. For the rest of the galaxy, it was a warning. And for the Crexian ascendancy, it was humiliation. The Crexian emperor, enraged by the loss of his fleet, declared vengeance on Earth. He called humanity a disease that must be cleansed from the stars. His voice echoed across hundreds of systems, and his people roared in anger. They began to build a war machine greater than anything they had ever created before. Their pride had been shattered, and they would stop at nothing to make the Deathworlders pay. The humans knew this was coming. They had seen it before. Admiral Mara Vance gathered her captains in the war room of the UNS Resolute, the same ship that had led the first battle. The air was tense, the light dim, and holographic maps of the galaxy shimmered above the table. The Crexian fleet was growing. Their scouts had already begun attacking outer human colonies. Small settlements on the edges of known space were vanishing, their signals cut off mid-transmission. Captain Ortega spoke first, slamming his fist on the table. "They're not just after revenge. They're testing us. They want to see how far we'll go." Vance nodded. "Then we show them we don't stop halfway." Within days, the United Earth Council declared a state of interstellar defense. Every colony, station, and outpost was ordered to prepare for war. The quiet rebuilding that had begun years ago now turned into full-scale mobilization. Shipyards worked 24 hours a day. Civilians volunteered to assist the fleet. Old veterans returned to command seats. The galaxy watched as the humans, once the most isolated species, now moved as one. The first Crexian counterattack came suddenly. A massive fleet jumped into the Sigma-9 system, a mining colony on the border of human space. The colony wasn't well defended, only a few patrol frigates and orbital cannons. The Crexians expected an easy victory. What they didn't expect was that the humans had already predicted their move. The moment the Crexians began their attack, a hidden fleet emerged from the planet's shadow. stealth destroyers cloaked with light-bending armor. Before the invaders could react, the humans struck. The battle lasted less than an hour. Every Crexian ship that entered the system was destroyed. None escaped. The miners on Sigma 9 watched in disbelief as their sky lit up with fire once again. But this time it was human fire, defending them instead of destroying them. Across the galaxy, that victory became legend. The Deathworlders had not just defended their territory, they had turned a trap into a massacre. But for Admiral Vance, it was only the beginning. She knew the Crexians would come again in greater numbers, and she was right. Weeks later, the Crexian armadas attacked 3 human colonies at once. On Erebus Station, civilians screamed as enemy ships rained plasma fire on their habitat domes. But even as chaos filled the air, human soldiers held their ground. They moved through the burning corridors in their black armor, pulling survivors from wreckage and returning fire with calm precision. The Crexians had superior numbers, but the Deathworlders had something else. Discipline, rage, and unity. One soldier's recording from Erebus later became famous across human space. His voice was steady, even as explosions roared in the background. "They think they're fighting humans," he said into his comm. "They're wrong. They're fighting the world that made us." When reinforcements arrived, the Crexians were wiped out completely. Not a single one survived to report back. Word spread fast, and the galaxy began to whisper the same phrase again. "Don't make the Deathworlders angry." But the Crexian Emperor refused to stop. He was too proud, too furious. He gathered his full war council and demanded a total invasion of human space. Billions of soldiers, hundreds of warships, and all the resources of his empire were poured into one mission: destroy Earth. His advisors warned him it was suicide. "They will not stop," one of them said. "They fight like storms. You cannot reason with storms." But the Emperor's pride was blind. "Then we will burn their world until even their storms die," he hissed. The humans knew what was coming. Admiral Vance assembled her largest fleet yet, not just from Earth but from colonies across the system. The Valari, healed and rebuilding, even sent their own small defense force in gratitude. It wasn't much, but the gesture meant everything. Humanity wasn't fighting alone anymore. Before the final confrontation, Vance stood before her crew. The lights of Earth glowed far below the ship, blue and beautiful. "This is not about revenge," she said quietly. "This is about peace. They think they can frighten us. But they don't understand what Earth is. Every storm, every volcano, every predator. We survived all of it. And we'll survive this too." Her speech was transmitted across the entire fleet. Soldiers listened in silence, their hearts pounding. For the first time in centuries, the human race stood united under one cause. The Crexian armada arrived at the edge of the solar system, like a tidal wave of fire, thousands of ships stretching as far as scanners could read. Their energy signatures lit up every screen. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in generations. Human fleets moved like living creatures, coordinated with perfect precision. Drones swarmed through enemy formations, detonating EMPs that shut down entire squadrons. Planetary cannons from Mars and Luna fired massive bursts that tore through Crexian cruisers. And when the Crexians tried to break through, the UNS Resolute and her escort ships cut them down with pinpoint strikes. In the middle of the chaos, Admiral Vance ordered a maneuver that would later be remembered in every military academy: the Wrath Line. Human ships formed a massive wall, locking into formation, and unleashed every weapon they had at once. The shockwave was so powerful it shattered the Crexian flagship and crippled half their fleet. The battle lasted for days. Both sides lost ships, but the humans refused to yield. Every time the Crexians tried to regroup, humanity pushed harder. They fought with a kind of relentless fury that no alien could understand. Even when ships were damaged, crews kept fighting until their last breath. Finally, when the Crexian Emperor's command ship was cornered, Admiral Vance sent a single transmission. "You wanted to burn our world. Look now, it is you who burns." Moments later, the Resolute fired its final railgun salvo. The Crexian Emperor's ship was hit directly. It exploded into a massive fireball that could be seen from Earth's orbit. The remaining Crexian fleets surrendered instantly, broadcasting a desperate message to every system: "We yield to Earth. They are not conquerors, and they are consequences." When the smoke cleared, humanity stood victorious once again. But the victory wasn't celebrated with cheers. There was no joy, no songs. The Deathworlders had fought because they had to, not because they wanted to. The cost of that victory was heavy. Ships destroyed, lives lost, colonies damaged. Still, they had protected not just themselves, but countless others. In the weeks after the war, alien diplomats from dozens of species came to Earth. They offered alliances, apologies, and gratitude. The humans accepted peace, but with a clear warning: never again would they ignore a cry for help. The galaxy learned something that day that it would never forget. Humanity was not the monster many had feared, but they were not to be provoked either. They were the storm that came when the innocent were attacked. They were the shadow that moved when others stood still. They were the Deathworlders, born from chaos, forged by survival, and bound by one unbreakable law: protect those who cannot protect themselves. From that day on, the Crexian ascendancy ceased to exist. Its worlds fell silent, its fleets dismantled. But its last broadcast still echoed in archives across the stars, a voice trembling with both fear and awe, saying, "They come not for vengeance. They come for justice." And through every star system, every planet, every moon, those words carried the truth. Humanity's wrath was not destruction, and it was balance. The Deathworlders had risen in fury, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy was finally quiet. After the Crexian War, the stars that had once burned with the light of destruction now shone peacefully again. Wreckage from the great battle still floated between worlds, silent reminders of what had happened when arrogance met the wrath of humanity. The Deathworlders had fought like storms, fierce and unstoppable, but now they stood among the ruins not as conquerors, but as guardians who had done what was necessary. On Earth, people looked to the skies differently. The war had changed them. There was pride, yes, but also sadness. Every victory had come with loss. Families who had lost sons and daughters received folded flags, their names carved into walls of remembrance. Admiral Mara Vance stood in front of one such wall one evening, her reflection shimmering across the engraved names. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 memories. The galaxy, once fearful of humanity, now began to approach them carefully. The Valari, the species whose distress signal had started everything, became the first to sign a treaty with Earth. Their planet, once almost wiped out, was slowly coming back to life. Valari children played under the newly repaired domes of their cities, and whenever a human ship entered orbit, the people waved in gratitude. Humanity had not just saved them, they had changed them forever. But not everyone in the galaxy welcomed peace. Many alien powers watched uneasily from a distance. They had seen the Deathworlders' fury, and though the humans spoke of peace, the others could not forget the sight of entire fleets destroyed within hours. Some whispered in fear that the humans might one day decide that others too were unworthy. To them, Earth had become a sleeping god, one that must never be awakened again. Admiral Vance understood that fear. She called a meeting of the Earth Council to discuss the future of the Deathworlders. They sat in the Grand Chamber in Geneva, surrounded by holographic projections of hundreds of alien worlds. "We can't rule through fear," she said quietly. "If we do, we become no different from those we fought." An older council member replied, "Fear keeps them away." "Fear keeps us safe," Vance shook her head. "No, fear creates enemies. Respect builds allies." Her words carried through the room, and though some disagreed, most nodded slowly. Humanity had earned a place among the stars, not as destroyers, but as defenders. That was how they wanted to be remembered. Months passed, and peace treaties were signed with more alien species. Joint research stations were built, and for the first time, humans worked alongside other civilizations on shared projects. The Valari taught humans about advanced energy manipulation, while humans shared their engineering and medical knowledge. Slowly, bridges were built where before there had only been walls. Still, there were shadows beneath the light. Out beyond the edge of known space, rumors began to spread. Talk of an old power awakening, a forgotten empire that had slept for thousands of years. Deep space probes picked up strange energy signals from the far reaches of the void. Some said it was nothing. Others believed it was something waiting for the right moment to rise. Admiral Vance knew better than to ignore such whispers. She gathered a small task force, volunteers from Earth, Mars, and the colonies, and sent them to investigate. Their mission was simple: find the source of the signals and determine if the galaxy was safe. Among those volunteers was Captain Elias Ward, a young officer who had fought during the Crexian War. He was brave, curious, and driven by something more than duty. For him, the war had not just been about defense. It had been about understanding. "We can't just keep fighting every time someone attacks us," he told his crew before they departed. "We have to understand why the galaxy keeps testing us." Their ship, the UNS Horizon, left orbit quietly and disappeared into deep space. No one knew what they would find. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Then one day, a faint message returned to Earth. A simple transmission, distorted and weak, but filled with both wonder and fear. "We found something," Ward's voice said. "Something older than all of us." And then the signal cut out. The Council debated sending a rescue mission, but Admiral Vance made the decision herself. "If we've awakened something," she said, "we need to face it, not hide from it." Humanity had learned through pain that ignoring danger only made it stronger. As the new fleet prepared to leave, the galaxy held its breath once again. Some watched with dread, others with hope. The Deathworlders were rising to meet another unknown, and every civilization that had ever doubted them now found themselves praying for their success. Meanwhile, on Valar Prime, a young Velari child asked his teacher, "Are the humans coming back?" The teacher smiled softly and replied, "Yes, child, but not as warriors, as protectors, out among the stars." Admiral Vance's fleet found what the Horizon had discovered, an ancient ring-like structure, enormous beyond comprehension, orbiting a dead sun. It was not made by any known species. Its surface pulsed with faint light like something alive. Strange symbols glowed across its surface, and sensors couldn't even measure how deep it went. It seemed endless, like a door to another universe. Vance stared at it through the viewport, silent. "What is it?" her science officer whispered. "Not a weapon," she said slowly. "A message." For weeks they studied the structure. What they found inside its data core changed everything. It was a record, not of a single civilization, but of thousands, all gone long before humanity ever reached the stars. The message was simple: beware the cycle. It told of a repeating pattern, civilizations rising, fighting, destroying each other, and then vanishing. The Crexians had been part of it. So had others before them. Each thought they were the strongest until they too were erased. Humanity was the latest to enter the cycle, but the message ended with a challenge. Break it or become it. When Vance returned to Earth, she brought that message with her. The council chamber was silent as she replayed the holographic projection. The faces of long-lost species flickered before them, their final warning echoing through the hall. "We're not the end of this story," she said quietly. "We're the beginning of a new one, if we choose to be." And so the Deathworlders changed their purpose. No longer would they fight only when attacked. Now they would seek to prevent wars before they began. They formed the Guardians Accord, an interstellar alliance built not on domination but on protection. Humanity would lead, not because others feared them, but because they had earned the galaxy's trust through sacrifice. Years passed, and peace slowly became the new reality. Children grew up learning about the war as history, not as warning. The word Deathworlders began to mean something new, not destroyers but saviors. A name once spoken in fear was now spoken with respect. Admiral Vance, now old and retired, often visited the memorial gardens on Luna Base. She would look out at Earth, blue and bright against the darkness, and remember the battles, the cries, the moments of impossible courage. When reporters once asked her if she regretted anything, she smiled faintly. "Only that we had to show our strength through pain," she said. "But maybe that's what humanity is, a species that turns pain into purpose." As she walked away, a new generation of cadets saluted her. They wore the insignia of the Guardians, a symbol of a hand holding a star. It meant one thing: strength and protection. Somewhere far beyond the Milky Way, that ancient structure still pulsed quietly, waiting. Perhaps the cycle had ended. Perhaps it was only paused. But for now, the galaxy slept in peace under the watch of the Deathworlders, the species that had once been feared and had become the keepers of balance. And in the deep quiet of space, a new voice whispered across the void, carried on forgotten frequencies. They answered the call once before. They will again. The stars shimmered like eyes watching from eternity. Humanity had come a long way from the world that birthed them, from storms, fire, and struggle. They had learned to wield both fury and mercy. And though the galaxy would never forget the wrath they once unleashed, it would remember something far greater. That when the helpless called out, it was the Deathworlders who rose.